The silence of the plains shattered as Kano collapsed in the dust, legs trembling under the brutal weight of exhaustion. Mara said, "Rise, my son, rise before they close in." His chest heaved, each breath scraping against the dryness of the air. Across the cracked horizon, Moro emerged with her hyenas, their eyes glowing like coals in the dying sun. Hunger dripped from their gaping jaws as they circled tighter, patient as the earth itself. Kano's heart thumped like a trapped drum, sweat darkening his flanks, fear locking his muscles. Mara pressed her body against him, trembling yet unyielding. The pack moved as one, shadows stretching long across the scorched ground. The sun sank low, blood-red against a sky without mercy. Death came not in a rush, but in a circle, unbroken, inevitable. The dust swallowed Kano's sobs, leaving only silence broken by laughter that was not laughter at all. The heat clung to Kano's body like chains as he struggled to stand, but his limbs faltered under the crushing weight of fatigue. Mara said, "Do not fall, fight against the earth." Her voice cracked with desperation, her body pressing against his side. Shadows stretched longer as Moro and her pack tightened their circle, patient as hunters bred for hunger. The air trembled with the low growls rolling from their throats, each sound a blade slicing through silence. Kano's eyes darted, searching for escape across plains that offered no mercy. His breath rasped like dry wind over stone, each exhale weaker than the last. Mara's stance grew sharper, her hooves biting the dust as she shielded him. Across the ring of circling bodies, Moro locked eyes with her, a stare filled with inevitability. The air felt heavy, pressing down like the weight of death itself. The dust thickened, choking Kano's lungs, his cries drowned in the laughter like cackles of the circling pack. Mara said, "Stay close, shield yourself behind me." Her body quaked, yet her hooves struck defiance into the soil. Moro's movements were slow, decanaberate, a predator savoring inevitability. The plains seemed to close inward, the horizon shrinking under the weight of dread. Kano's ears flicked back, every sound magnified by terror, paws shifting, teeth clicking, growls rumbling like thunder before rain. The scent of hunger hung sharp in the air, metallic, alive. Mara shifted sideways, blocking a low advance, her muscles tense against exhaustion. Kano pressed into her, his frame trembling under fear's command. The circle tightened, leaving no doubt of their intent. The wild had no pause, no mercy, no kindness to spare. Each second carved fear deeper into Kano's bones. Kano collapsed again, the sound of his body striking the ground echoing through the still air. Mara said, "Stand, Kano, stand now." Her voice carried both command and grief. His chest heaved, ribs straining against thin hide, eyes glazed with fear. Moro's pack halted, savoring the weakness, every breath a signal of his end. The sunset painted blood across the sky, the last light catching dust that hung like smoke. Kano's breath came in short bursts, a rhythm breaking into panic. Mara planted herself above him, her silhouette cut against the red horizon, unbroken despite exhaustion. The pack's growls deepened, their bodies crouching lower, claws raking the soil in anticipation. The plains seemed to hold its breath, silence pressing as time slowed. Between predator and prey, the thin line of survival wavered on the edge of collapse. The air grew electric, heavy with inevitability as Moro crept closer, each step echoing louder than the last. Kano's body sagged against the earth, his gaze unfocused, mouth dry with despair. Mara said, "If you fall, I fall with you." Her body trembled, yet she held her ground, hooves carving trenches in dust. The pack's eyes gleamed like sparks in dying light, their growls rising in unison like a chant of hunger. The horizon darkened as clouds gathered, winds sweeping dust into violent spirals. Kano whimpered softly, his body shuddering under each breath, while Mara bent lower, shielding him with her shadow. Moro bared her teeth, saliva glistening like silver under fading light. The circle closed, step by step, until the distance between life and death shrank to nothing. The first act of survival had begun, and the wild was ready to decide. Kano staggered, his chest rattling as if each breath would be his last. Mara said, "Hold to me, you are not alone." Her body leaned into his, strength offered though her frame trembled. The plains stretched endless, scorched earth cracked like old scars. Above them, vultures spiraled with patient hunger, their shadows cutting across the dust. Kano's eyes widened, fear and exhaustion locked in battle as his hooves dragged shallow furrows into the ground. The taste of blood lingered on his tongue, metallic and bitter. Mara's gaze softened only when she looked down at him, her voice both steel and tenderness. Moro's distant growls rippled like thunder, yet Mara stood firm, tethering Kano to survive. The world seemed determined to erase him, yet his heartbeat carried a rhythm too stubborn to surrender. The wind howled low across the plains, carrying with it the scent of death. Kano's legs shook as he pressed into Mara's flank, his body desperate for warmth and strength. Mara said, "You are more than weakness, rise against it." Her words cracked through the air like a whip, though her eyes betrayed worry. The soil beneath them was fractured, barren, offering no promise of refuge. Far across the horizon, Moro lingered in the half-light, her pack restless yet patient. Kano lowered his head, ears pinned, nostrils flaring with panic. Each step forward felt stolen, borrowed from a future that might not arrive. Mara's breath was steady, her body a shield despite the quiver in her stance. The bond between them glowed fragile but unbroken, a thread resisting the snapping jaws of fate. The silence between growls grew heavy, pressing down like a weight that refused to lift. Kano's ears twitched as if even air carried threats, his body sagging beneath the sky's red glow. Mara said, "The earth tests you, but you must endure." Her stance was rigid, eyes darting across the circle of predators. Kano's chest heaved, each gasp a war against collapse, dust clinging to the damp streaks on his hide. His innocence sharpened the cruelty of the night, a spark too decanonicate against the storm. The plain stretched empty, no herd to answer, no savior near. Hyena eyes glowed brighter with hunger, but patience held them still. The bond between mother and calf pulsed with desperate defiance, a fragile wall standing against inevitability. Kano stumbled to his knees, the sound of his body striking dirt muffled by thick dust. Mara said, "Do not surrender, for breath is strength." Her muzzle brushed his neck in a fleeting comfort, before her eyes hardened again. Across the ring, Moro shifted forward, her pack restless with anticipation. Kano's nostrils flared, his heart pounding so loud it drowned the growls that closed in around him. The sky deepened into bruised purple, the last rays of sunlight vanishing behind fractured clouds. Mara's stance grew larger in the gloom, her shadow stretching over Kano like a shield. The earth beneath them felt like a battlefield, ancient and unyielding. With each breath, Kano was both closer to collapse and yet tethered to survival through her defiance. The night's first stars pierced through the veil of dusk, cold against the warmth of the earth. Kano lay trembling, eyes half-lidded, breaths uneven. Mara said, "Sleep is death. Stay with me, fight the night." Her body pressed against his, her weight steady, a wall against despair. Hyenas padded closer, their silhouettes breaking the horizon, each step dripping hunger. The wind carried their laughter, sharp and jagged, cutting into Kano's ears. His innocence was a wound exposed, every weakness an invitation to strike. Mara's body bore scars, but her spirit refused surrender. The fragile calf beneath her ribs represented more than survival. He was legacy, a thread to the future. In that moment, every choice, every stand, every breath was war. And war was the only answer the wild demanded. The night air thickened with growls as Moro's pack advanced, their bodies weaving shadows into the dust. Kano stumbled, his legs buckling, every step a cry of weakness. Mara said, "Stand, fight the darkness." Her voice cracked, but her stance remained unbroken. Moro's eyes glowed like embers, her patience shifting into predatory intent. The plains pulsed with dread, wind carving violent spirals around them. Kano gasped, his breath sharp and shallow, hooves dragging like anchors. The hyena's laughter cut through silence, each note dripping hunger. Mara pushed her body forward, shielding Kano, but her chest rose with effort too heavy to hide. The circle narrowed, dust rising like smoke from a battlefield. Hunger, exhaustion, and fear braided together into a noose that tightened with every second. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of rot and hunger, a warning written into the air itself. Kano's chest rose and fell in uneven bursts, eyes wide with terror. Mara said, "You must endure, even if I fall." Her body leaned against his, fierce though trembling. Moro's pack padded closer, their claws raking shallow scars into the soil. The sound echoed like drums of war, building a rhythm of dread. Kano staggered, hooves slipping in dust, his body nearly folding again. Mara struck the ground with force, her defiance ringing out across the plains. Moro bared her teeth, her cackle spreading through the circle like fire. The struggle was no longer about speed or strength. It was survival dragged raw against inevitability. The night pressed close, heavy with unspoken finality. Kano lurched sideways, his legs folding as though the ground itself betrayed him. Mara said, "Rise now, fight for every breath." Her muzzle brushed his ear, her tone torn between command and pleading. Moro's eyes narrowed, her body lowering into a predator's stance, hunger sharpening every line of her form. The hyenas shifted closer, their growls vibrating like thunder beneath the earth. Kano gasped, the dust burning in his throat, his eyes glassy with despair. Mara pressed harder against him, her hooves biting into soil that crumbled with every strike. Moro's pack moved in rhythm, shoulders rolling, their silhouettes stark against the bruised horizon. The plain held its breath, waiting for the clash of survival. Fear and hunger collided in the silence, balanced on the edge of collapse. The dust storm swirled faster, cutting across the plains in sharp spirals that stung the eyes. Kano cried out, his body convulsing in panic, legs clawing at the ground for balance. Mara said, "Do not give them what they crave." Her voice sliced through the storm, steel wrapped in exhaustion. Moro crept closer, saliva dripping from her muzzle, her movements slow, to collaborate, cruel in their patience. The pack's laughter rose, carried by the wind until it sounded endless. Kano pressed into Mara's flank, trembling with every breath, each exhale a battle. Mara's frame quivered, but her stance never faltered. Her shadow cast long across the sand. The earth itself felt hostile, the storm weaving with predators to crush the fragile spark of resistance that still clung to the night. The plains erupted in motion as Moro lunged forward, her pack echoing her intent with violent steps. Kano collapsed once more, his body folding like broken earth. Mara said, "If you fall, I rise for you." Her hooves carved trenches as she shoved forward, horns lowered in defiance. Moro snapped her jaws inches from Kano, her growl a thunderclap against the silence. The hyenas fanned out, their bodies weaving shadows that devoured the calf's fragile form. Kano's breaths rattled, his chest rising only by sheer force of will. Mara's body quaked, her muscles torn between fear and rage. The moment held the rhythm of climax, the plain itself trembling beneath the collision of need and survival. The line between life and death thinned to a single heartbeat. The storm eased into silence, and for the first time Moro hesitated, her eyes flicking, not at Mara, but to the horizon behind her. Kano gasped, his sides heaving, unaware of the revelation that hung in the night. Mara said, "She waits because hunger waits with her." Across the plain, faint cries pierced the wind. The sound of pups, fragile and desperate, hidden beyond the rocks. Moro's growl faltered, not in mercy but in urgency. Her ribs pressed against her skin, her body a vessel of need for mouths that waited unseen. Kano trembled, confused by the hesitation, but Mara's stare hardened with understanding. The truth struck with sharp clarity. Predator and prey both bore the same weight of survival, bound by hunger, bound by legacy. The plain revealed no villains, only victims of its law. Kano's ears twitched, catching the faint mewls that drifted over the wind. His eyes widened with innocence, struggling to comprehend. "Mara," said. "Her hunger is not hers alone." The words carried both revelation and dread. Moro shifted her stance, torn between the calf before her and the cries behind her. Her body quivered with need, saliva dripping in steady streams, yet her gaze lingered where her young waited. Kano pressed into Mara, fear still heavy, but confusion flickered in his glance. The circle of hyenas wavered, restless but bound by their leader's hesitation. For a heartbeat, predator and prey stood united by fragility. The law of survival cracked open to reveal a truth too raw to ignore. Every life carried chains, and every hunger carved its mark upon the earth. The air grew colder as clouds thinned, stars breaking through with piercing clarity. Mara said, "Survival binds us all, but choice divides us." Her body stiffened, standing taller despite fatigue. Moro's ears twitched toward the cries of her pups, her growl replaced with panting that spoke of exhaustion and hunger. Kano trembled, his frailty undeniable, yet his gaze locked onto the hyena with bewildered recognition. The pack circled still, but their movements faltered, their hunger turned hesitant by their leader's indecision. The wild unfolded, not as a tale of cruelty but of echoes, mirrored struggles carved into prey and predator alike. Kano pressed closer into Mara, but in his eyes flickered a fragile empathy that cut through fear. The storm of conflict shifted into revelation, haunting and unrelenting. Kano shuddered, his body still trembling but his gaze no longer locked only in terror. Mara said, "Even shadows carry burdens." Her words drifted like a whisper to herself as much as to him. Moro turned her head, her muzzle lifting toward the faint sound of her young gown. Hunger pressed her forward, but love held her back, an invisible tether between predator and her blood. Kano's hooves dragged shallow grooves into the dirt, but his eyes held the moment as if it burned into him. The pack growled low, restless, their bodies tightening, as if urging Moro to choose. The night held stillness that weighed heavier than chaos. The revelation was not mercy, not peace. It was the brutal truth that every creature bled for something beyond itself. The cries grew sharper, carried by the wind as if demanding Moro's choice. Kano's body sagged into Mara, his breaths thin yet alive. Mara said, "Her battle is ours mirrored." Her eyes flicked to Moro with grim understanding. And the predator's hunger was not cruelty but necessity, the same law that chained them all. Moro's gaze lingered on Kano, her body twitching forward, then faltering as the cries pierced sharper. The pack's growls broke into restless snaps, frustration rising as patience thinned. Kano whimpered, eyes reflecting fear but also something softer, recognition of shared fragility. The plain itself felt heavier, burdened by truths carved into silence. The hidden truth did not free them, it only deepened the wound. Survival's law was universal, cruel, not in intent but in its absolution. The stillness shattered as Moro lunged, her pack erupting in violent unison, claws ripping the soil with each stride. Kano screamed, his body folding beneath fear's crushing weight. Mara said, "I will not let them take you." Her hooves thundered as she shoved forward, horns lowered in reckless defiance. Moro's jaws snapped, missing Kano by a breath, sparks of saliva catching moonlight. The pack fanned wide, flanking, their movements sharp and relentless. Dust erupted beneath them, rising in clouds that cloaked the battlefield. Kano's legs buckled, but he clung to life through sheer will. Mara's frame quivered with exhaustion, yet her eyes burned with fury that carved light into the night. The climax ignited, a storm where mercy had no place. Kano staggered to his knees, his ribs expanding with ragged breaths as Mara slammed into the first hyena, her horns striking with a crack that split the silence. Mara said, "Breathe, Kano, keep breathing." Blood sprayed across the dust as Moro snarled, lunging again. The pack swarmed, their bodies weaving shadows, their hunger unbroken by pain. Kano cried out, his legs folding once more, his hooves dragging furrows into the ground. Mara braced above him, chest heaving, every breath laced with fire. Moro's laughter echoed, cruel and desperate, her pack encircling tighter. The air smelled of iron, dust and death, the battlefield painted by the clash of will and hunger. Every heartbeat pounded like war drums in the darkness. Kano collapsed flat, his chest pressed into the dirt, his breath rattling shallow like wind through hollow bones. Mara said, "Do not leave me, rise once more." Her body shook, blood streaking her hide from fresh wounds. "Oh!" Moro darted forward, snapping jaws inches from Kano's neck, before Mara struck sideways, her horns raking sparks against bone and hide. The pack howled, a chorus of hunger and rage, their eyes burning brighter than the stars above. Kano whimpered, his body trembling against the soil, his heart pounding weak but steady. Mara planted herself like a wall, her hooves gouging earth that crumbled under pressure. The plains thundered with chaos, dust swirling into choking clouds, every moment etched in desperate fury. The battle tore the night apart. Mara lunged again, her horns glancing Moro's shoulder, the impact sending the hyena spinning. Kano whimpered, legs twitching, body too weak to rise. Mara said, "Stand, even if I fall." Her eyes burned with fire that defied exhaustion. Moro recovered instantly, her growl exploding with rage as she rallied her pack. The hyenas surged, their bodies flowing like shadows in relentless rhythm. Dust swallowed the plain, obscuring breath and sight, every motion violent, desperate. Kano's heart thumped weak but unyielding, his chest heaving in shallow bursts. Mara braced, bloodied but unbroken, her frame trembling under endless strain. The climax swelled, merciless and magnificent, survival distilled into chaos. The clash reached its peak as Mara roared, shoving herself against the circling pack, her body bleeding yet defiant. Kano cried out, a thin sound that pierced the chaos like glass shattering. Mara said, "Live, Kano, even if I must fall." Her horns slashed air, scattering predators for heartbeats only. Moro lunged once more, her muzzle dripping, her eyes burning with hunger and desperation. The pack snapped and lunged, their growls filling the night like thunder. Kano pressed into the dust, his eyes glazed, yet his heart still beat against despair. Mara's frame trembled, every wound pulling her closer to collapse. The climax hung in stillness, predator and prey suspended in violent defiance, every breath a final prayer. The dust settled in heavy silence, broken only by Kano's ragged breaths as his body sagged into the ground. Mara stood trembling above him, her frame streaked with blood and dust, her strength drained into the soil. Mara said, "Do not close your eyes, not yet." Her voice was weak, yet it cut sharper than steel. Moro paced at the edge, her muzzle dripping, her ribs gaunt beneath her mottled coat. Hunger pressed her forward, but the cries of her pups pulled her back. The pack whined in restless frustration, caught between instinct and command. Kano's eyes flickered half shut, his chest rising shallow against the weight of exhaustion. The plains stilled, the storm gone, leaving only the choice carved into silence. The law of survival had not ended, it simply waited. Kano stirred, his hooves twitching against the cracked earth, his breath rattling shallow but alive. Mara bent low, her muzzle brushing his back, whispering strength into him with her trembling presence. Mara said, "Every breath is a victory." Moro growled low, her eyes burning with conflict, torn between prey and the cries drifting faint from beyond the plain. The pack snarled, snapping at dust, their patience breaking. Kano's gaze shifted weakly toward Mara, confusion and fear clouding his eyes, but life still flickered. The night's brutality gave way to the fragile light of dawn, the horizon bleeding soft gold into gray. It was not triumph, nor peace, it was survival balanced by sacrifice, inevitable and cruel. The first rays of light cut across the plain, casting long shadows that stretched like scars. Mara said, "The night has not broken us yet." Her words trembled with fatigue, yet her eyes still burned with defiance. Kano shuddered beneath her, ribs sharp under his hide, his innocence bruised by terror. Moro's pack shifted, restless, their hunger gnawing louder than patience could hold. Yet Moro stood frozen, her gaze pulled again to the cries hidden far across the rocks. The law of survival revealed itself not as cruelty, but as chains binding all. Kano pressed his muzzle weakly into Mara's side, the gesture small yet desperate. The wild had spoken, not with victory, but with inevitability. The pack began to retreat, step by reluctant step, their growls fading into frustrated echoes. Moro lingered, her body trembling with hunger, her muzzle dripping with need, yet her head turned once more toward the horizon. Mara said, "Go to what waits for you." Her words were quiet, carved from exhaustion and knowing. Kano's body shifted faintly, life clinging by fragile threads, his breath uneven but present. The plains stretched endless and indifferent, uncaring of the sacrifices buried in its dust. Moro growled one last time, a sound not of triumph but of hunger unfulfilled, then turned away. The circle broke, the silence swallowed everything, leaving only the weak heartbeat of survival. The battle ended not in triumph, but in survival carved fragile into the dawn. Kano lay trembling, alive but broken, his eyes glassy yet refusing to close. Mara said, "The wild has taken much, but not you." Her body sagged, trembling under wounds and exhaustion, yet she stood. The plain was silent, stripped of growls, but the memory of fangs lingered sharp in the air. Moro's shadow disappeared beyond the rocks, her cries joining the faint mewls of waiting pups. The dust settled, golden light spilling across scars carved into earth. The resolution carried no mercy, no victory, only inevitability. Nature had chosen not kindness, but balance, cruel and absolute. Survival remained, fragile and haunting, a story that would echo long beyond the dawn. Dawn bled fully across the horizon, painting the plains in gold that could not hide the scars of the night. Kano lay trembling in the dust, his body battered, his breath shallow but steady. Mara said, "The wild has spared you for now." Her voice was hoarse, weighted by both Rakanoef and grief. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint rustle of wind across cracked earth. Moro's shadow was gone, yet her absence carried a haunting presence, as if her hunger still lingered in the air. Kano's eyes blinked slowly, glazed with exhaustion yet unbroken by finality. The law of survival had left its mark, neither victory nor peace, only survival etched into the dust. The vultures circled overhead, their wings carving silent arcs against the sky, patient witnesses to life's fragile balance. Kano stirred faintly, his body twitching as if each breath was borrowed. Mara said, "Every step forward will carry this night." Her gaze stretched across the empty horizon, her eyes reflecting both pride and despair. The scars carved into her hide glistened under morning light, each one a testimony of survival bought at a cost. The plains were quiet, but silence held weight heavier than growls or storms. Kano's innocence was gone, replaced by a fragile will that flickered against the immensity of the wild. The echo of the night remained, haunting yet unbroken. Kano lifted his head weakly, his eyes glassy but alive, staring into the vast emptiness ahead. Mara said, "The path remains, though broken." Her voice trembled with fatigue, but her stance was still protective, her shadow cast long across the earth. The plain offered no kindness, only endless distance, a road paved with hunger and struggle. Yet Kano's body shifted slightly, his muzzle pressing into the dust as though testing his strength. The horizon gleamed with light, but its beauty carried no mercy. Every scar, every breath, every heartbeat was survival, written into fragile flesh. The echo of hunger remained behind them, but the weight of future steps pressed ahead. Mara stood still, her eyes fixed on the horizon, her body trembling yet unyielding. Kano tried to rise, his legs quivering as if the earth itself resisted him. Mara said, "One step is all that matters now." Her voice carried the weight of legacy, passed from scars to fragile flesh. The plains stretched eternal, empty yet demanding, every crack and stone a reminder of battles carved into time. Kano's hooves pressed weakly against the soil, his body swaying, but the attempt was enough. Survival persisted. The silence grew heavier, yet in it echoed the truth. Nature owed nothing, and still, life fought to endure. The final cry pierced the morning. Not a roar, not a scream, but a fragile sound pulled from Kano's lungs. It rose thin and weak, yet undeniable, cutting through silence like glass. Mara said, "The wild will remember." Her voice was low, fading into the wind, her eyes locked on the endless horizon. The vultures circled slower, the dust drifted softer, and the sun burned brighter against scars carved into earth. Kano's cry lingered, fragile yet haunting, an echo that stretched beyond the plain. The story closed, not with victory or loss, but with memory etched into silence. The last sound carried weight enough to shatter stillness, a fragile voice declaring life against inevitability.